Good evening. I'm Jerry Jennings, and I'm president of the Great Falls Rising Board. And on behalf of the board, I welcome all of you here tonight, and thank you for attending tonight's gathering. It promises to be both interesting and educational, so I'm really excited about it. Great Falls Rising is a nonpartisan, progressive movement that empowers individuals and connects communities while fostering equality, diversity, human rights, civil liberties, and a sustainable future through respectful dialogue, education, and advocacy. The presentation tonight, Civility in Public Discourse, Is It Possible?, is sponsored by Great Falls Rising and the Helena League of Women Voters. Always nice to have cooperation, especially between cities. This is a nonpartisan discussion for the community, and it is not a fundraising program for any organization. Right now, I'm going to ask for a moment of silence, and this is for our Jewish brothers and sisters at the Tree of Life Community Synagogue in Pittsburgh, and also for the African Americans who were killed in the Kroger store in Kentucky, all hate crimes. So if we could just be silent for a minute, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you. And now Pam Carroll has an announcement. Pam, there she is. She could probably shout, but come on up to the mic.
As Jerry said, we're a progressive movement, and we're nonpartisan and no membership fees or anything. But in order to do these wonderful programs, it sometimes costs us money, and then we have to pay rent here. And so we're just kind of operating on a shoestring, so we just pass the hat. So anything that you can give is welcome, and we appreciate. And if you can't give, we understand that too, because your presence is also appreciated too. So we're gonna just pass it. If you've already donated, don't feel obligated, but thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you, Pam. If you're interested in serving as a polling monitor on Election Day, next Tuesday, please see either Pam or Claire Bays. Claire, raise your hand after the program. I want to thank the Episcopal Church because, yes, we pay a little bit, but we don't pay very much. And it's wonderful to have this kind of venue to hold these gatherings. And right now, I would like to introduce you to Father Tim Jungren, who's back there with the collar. And he's the priest at our church and always welcoming to groups to use the church. I want to thank Art Dolman. Art, where are you? For doing the monthly book review. And we always get a good number of people coming to that. So thank you, Art, for doing that. Thanks to Kathy Hodges over here for the sound system. She and her husband usually do this together, but tonight he's in Las Vegas for a meeting.
That's what they all say.
I want to thank Shannon Wilson for videotaping this, because there are a number of people who couldn't come tonight. I don't know where they would have sat if they did come, but anyway, they couldn't come, and really we're hoping that we would be taping this. And I want to thank the Great Falls Rising Board, because there are 12 of us, and the work is big, and the work gets done. And that's the kind of group you want to belong to. Now, I won't ask these students from government classes to stand because I'll embarrass them, but I want to thank Zach Shermley and Seamus Jennings for rousting up some students to come. So that's terrific. And we also have some candidates for public office and some people in public office with us, hopefully, because this is very important for them. So could you all stand, please, if you are a candidate or you are in public office now. And we want to thank you so much because as much as we're behind you, you're doing the work for us. So thank you for doing that. And now to get on with, well, wait a minute, no. The next Great Falls Rising Gathering is Tuesday, November 27th. That's after Thanksgiving, and it will be on citizen lobbying. So that's pretty important, and we're hoping that we can get more citizen lobbyists in the legislature this next session. Our holiday party, which is held here and is totally no program, is Friday, December 7th, and you're all invited to that as well. So, on with the program. I'll introduce Barbara Harris, who will introduce our presenters and facilitate the discussion. Barb. She has been in Montana since 1977. She worked for the Office of Public Instruction and then the Centennial Office until she retired in 1988. She has been a League of Women Voters member for about 15 years and is completing her second term as co-president of the Helena League. She volunteers at the Montana Talking Books Library every week and is active in Kiwanis in Helena. She's widowed with 3 sons and 4 grandchildren. So I want to thank our presenters for coming. You had the most beautiful ride in the world coming over here today from Helena. Thanking them for taking time to join us in tonight's gathering and communicating your thoughts about a critical issue today, civility in public discourse. Thank you all, and thanks Barb, who will take over now.
Thank you, Jerry. And again, I'd like to also express my thanks to the panelists for giving up their time to come and give this presentation for you. I think you will find it very educational and very interesting, and I know you won't be disappointed. Each panelist will make about a 5 to 10 minute presentation, then we will open it up for questions. First, I would like to introduce our panelists in the order that they will be presenting. Ron Waterman will lead off. Ron is, after graduating from law school in Missoula and a year clerking for a federal judge, Ron and his wife Mignon and family moved to Helena, where he practiced law with Guff, Shanahan, Johnson, and Waterman until he retired at the end of 2016 and moved to part-time practice. Ron has been involved with United Way and Florence Crittenden Home and other social service organizations and is a current board member of the Library Board and chair of the National Crittenden Foundation. Justice Beth Baker was raised in Spokane, Washington, and has lived in Montana since graduating from college in 1982. She's a 1985 graduate of the University of Montana School of Law. Justice Baker began her legal career as a law clerk for federal judge Charles C. Lowell, served approximately 12 years with the Montana Attorney General's office, including 4 years as Chief Deputy Attorney General, and then spent the next 10 years in private practice of law with the Helena firm of Hughes, Kellner, Sullivan, and Elke. Justice Baker was elected to the Montana Supreme Court in November 2010 and was sworn into office January 3, 2011. She has worked most of her career to help make the court system open to all Montanans, serving on the State Bar of Montana's Access to Justice Committee and as director of the Montana Justice Foundation. Justice Baker chairs the Montana Supreme Court's Access to Justice Commission. In 2013, she was awarded the Carla M. Gray Equal Justice Award by the State Bar of Montana. And you all know Mitch Tropila. He was born and raised in Great Falls, in Great Falls, Montana. Our next panelist is a University of Montana 1987 graduate. His degrees in business administration and radio TV somehow allowed him to be accepted into the U.S. Peace Corps from 1988 to 1990. He served in Botswana, Africa as a public works director in the Okavango Delta region. Returning home, he went to work as a computer salesman broker for an international computer company, eventually branching out and starting his own computer brokerage, Big Fish LLC. Also, upon returning from Botswana, he followed his passion and became involved with politics in Cascade County. Following many years in the Cascade County Democratic Central Committee, and after helping out on numerous state and local campaigns, our panelist decided to run his own campaign for the Montana Senate in 2006. He served 8 years in the Montana Senate and 2 in the Montana House of Representatives. In 2016, he lost a race for Cascade County Commissioner, but soon found work as the Public Policy and Development Officer with Easter Seals, Goodwill Northern Rocky Mountain, headquartered in Great Falls. Got too many papers here. Our next panelist was Mike Dennison. Mike is a chief political reporter for the Montana Television Network, which owns 9 stations across the state in every major market. He has been covering politics and state government in Montana for the past 30 years, including stints at the Great Falls Tribune and the Associated Press. You can read and see his work online on his professional Facebook page, MTN Politics with Mike Dennison, or on MTM's individual stations' websites. And finally, last but not least, Justice Elizabeth Best. We saved the best for last. Another hometown girl. Judge Elizabeth A. Best, District Court Judge from the 8th Judicial District in Great Falls, graduated in 1981 from the University of Montana School of Law. After law school, she served in the U.S. Army GAGC in Germany, providing legal assistance to soldiers, prosecuting crimes, teaching the law of war to soldiers, and acting as U.S. liaison to German prosecutors in cases involving American soldiers. Upon return to Montana, she clerked for U.S. District Judge Paul Hatfield, and then entered private practice. As a trial lawyer, she served on the board of directors of the Montana Trial Lawyers Association for nearly 20 years, served as Montana Trial Lawyers President from 2001 to 2002, and is one of only 2 women lawyers in Montana invited to join the American Board of Trial Advocates, which named her Trial Lawyer of the Year in 2008, the first woman in the history of MTLA to earn this prestigious award. She was named Montana State Super Lawyer 7 times before taking the bench. During her career as a trial lawyer, Judge Best served on the Montana Supreme Court Commissions on Rules of Evidence and Civil and Appellate Procedure and the U.S. District Court Local Rules Committee. Governor Schweitzer appointed her successively to chair the Montana Board of Labor Appeals and then the Montana State Fund Board. She also served 2 terms on the Centerville School Board. So I think you will agree with me, we have a panel of experts. They've all had a lot of experience. And now, Ron, you can take it from there.
Well, thank you very much for the kind invitation, and thank you very much, all of you, for attending this. I believe the size of the crowd demonstrates either one of 2 things. Either there's a great public interest in this, or you all heard about the free refreshments before the event. I have often found that it's probably the free refreshments that bring people out, and then we're the accidental dessert. I have practiced law for, next year will be 50 years. So I reach back to a number of decades of practicing law in Montana, and I've enjoyed my practice many times coming up here in Great Falls to be before the various members of the district court bench. I did not have the privilege of appearing before Judge Best, but I'm certain that she is going to adjudicate justice in the manner that I think we all expect. We're talking tonight about civility and its lack. And it seems to me as though to understand the problem and to propose solutions, first you have to understand where it is that we are with the issue of civil discourse. It's easy to dismiss this issue as one that is primarily a political problem, highlighted by the current state of affairs at the presidential level. However, I think the issue is much broader and deeper, and it affects us all in our everyday lives. This is where we are today. In Helena, if you go out from the city dump, as you exit and pay for any load that you deposited as a dump, there is a reminder on the window that users are told that if they use profanity or are angry with a clerk administering the dump check-in and check-out weights, that could result in a person being charged with a misdemeanor. Those warnings tell you what's happening in the everyday discourse. Notice when you go to your county register and go to renew or license a vehicle, you're told that as you do that, if you are discourteous and profane or angry to a clerk, that action could result in a person being charged with a misdemeanor. And we are forever tragically watching what I think you can only describe as the meaningless slaughter of innocent children and individuals in schools and now churches. And we appear to be unable to find common sense solutions to any of this violence. And if it was not done intentionally, those who watched the most recent hearings on the position of a new justice for associate justice for the United States Supreme Court saw how civil discourse has been reduced to a level that I would have thought impossible years ago. And now we see what I think are the harvest of that discourse, with the senseless bomb threats against public officials and the tragedy of the synagogue deaths in Pittsburgh. And there is probably some question as to whether or not there's an end in sight. But I think I want to step back and ask the question, or at least address my perspective of how we got there. I think the seeds of the current state of affairs with civil discourse goes back to the 60s and to the Vietnam War. As many of us personally recall or have read, this was during the decade of civil disturbance well beyond what we are experiencing today. The very fabric of society was being torn apart during those years. There were multiple bombings. There were cities that were burned to the ground with rioting. Our political figures were assassinated. We lost, in the course of just 50 years ago today, both Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy in the course of about 2.5 months. Other controversial figures, overt racists like George Wallace, took the national stage. Vietnam was, I think, the first American war where the split of support and dissent for that war split along generational lines. Mostly those opposed to the war were vocal and in the streets, and they were young. Mostly those who supported the war were part of the establishment. They were older and more experienced. As it turned out, those who opposed the war were correct in so many ways, as was later shown by the Pentagon Papers and by the secret recordings that we now hear about with key leaders debating privately and agreeing to conceal from the American public, both that the war was not being won, but also that we were broadening the conflict and corrupting the entire area of Southeast Asia as a ground war to its inevitable resolution, the fall of South Vietnam, and the unification of that country back into a single Vietnam. In rejecting the position of those who supported the war, the young moved on to questioning many of the other institutions which also were supported by older generations. The dynamic of the atmosphere in which virtually all public institutions was evaluated came about. The young rejected what the older generation supported. Wrong on the war translated into wrong on all other aspects of living. Thus, we started to see the collapse of the other institutions which formed the basis for a common sense of community. Large mainline churches suffered a decline in attendance which has continued through today. Virtually all civic and community organizations suffered the same fate. A recent book, Bowling Alone, highlighted this phenomena of individuals pulling away from organizations which gave commonality to organized life and replaced this with singular activity. And the internet has just simply accelerated that isolation of individuals. Politically, we saw the continuation of that generational divide which happened during the Vietnam War. The young supported individuals who were, to some degree, anti-establishment. Gene McCarthy, George McGovern, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and even Barack Obama. And the establishment pushed back. At first, those within the establishment, understanding politics better, were able to win elections, Nixon and Ford. But by the middle of the 70s, the young had learned also how to organize politically. We see that continued organization today, and demonstrated this with the election of Jimmy Carter, among others. But I think the watershed event, I believe, was the election of Ronald Reagan. Reagan was, if you will, the ultimate establishment figure who saw that large government, with all of the New Deal and Johnson anti-poverty programs, were a part of the problem. He said so during his inaugural address, saying that the government isn't here to be a solution, the government is part of the problem. And during those Reagan years, America experienced the first large-scale health emergency in the form of the AIDS epidemic. Had this been an illness which had affected the elderly and the middle class of America, most likely the government would have responded to that crisis with immediate health responses. As it was, given the population primarily affected, young men with different sexual orientation and drug users. The epidemic was ignored by Reagan, who during 8 years in office never mentioned the AIDS epidemic at all. Once, and as a consequence, funding to address that health crisis was delayed for years, with innumerable deaths, and with further discord over the trust or distrust of government. By the time the Reagan years ended, I believe the seeds of the current state of civil discourse had well been planted. We are now at a time when that harvest has come full fruition. And we are left with a set of conflicts we are seeing playing out in our everyday lives. Now, I think there is some hope which remains and exists. We see it from time to time as the American people confront those dilemmas which we see in recent hurricanes, even in the wildfires that have swept through Montana, where individuals pull themselves together as community and act in one response appropriately toward an emergency, toward an event. We saw it during 9/11. We have this power to come together as people and to find strength in the common fabric of America. What we need to do, I believe, is to look closely at those events, those singular events that we see, those challenges, and draw from them the experiences and strength which the American public has displayed as a people. We have been able to set aside differences and find strength in our common background and experience. There is hope, I believe, for a renewal of the sense of community which stands in contrast to the present state of civil discord.
Thank you, Ron. Justice Baker?
Thank you, and I hope everyone can hear me all right. It seemed like the microphone was pretty loud, so I won't hold it too close, but please raise your hand. I have a softer voice than Ron. You need to turn it. Well, I too am glad to be here tonight and to be part of this discussion. The title of the panel tonight is Civil Discourse, Is It Possible? And I think we have to answer yes to that question, because it certainly won't be possible if we don't think it is possible, if we don't work to get ourselves there. I think the size of the group tonight and the number of these discussions that are going on around the country are increasing. The citizenry is becoming more and more interested in trying to find better ways to communicate and live together as a society. And I'm going to focus a little bit on how my perspective from being a member of the judiciary and the role of the courts and lawyers in our system to kind of set the tone, I guess. And the first thing I think we have to recognize is that our system of government is set up to be in conflict to some extent. It was designed, and I'll borrow a term that's been used in architectural realms. My father was an architect, and I recently came upon this term, and I really think it is apt. Tensegrity, which is a combination of tension, it's tensional integrity. And it's an architectural term because it is based on the use of isolated components in compression inside a net of continuous tension in such a way that the compressed members do not touch each other. And the pre-stressed tensioned members, usually cable or tendons, delineate the system spatially. And I think it describes our three branches of government and the way the states work in tension with the federal government. It's all set up to have this, the checks and balances so that not one branch overtakes the other, and that builds in tension. But the key there is they don't touch each other, and we all have to have that spatial existence in our own branches and have respect for the other branches of government. And in the court system, our whole job is dealing with conflict. I mean, it's our whole job to resolve people's disputes. And that's why the courts exist, and that's why this country is a model for all the world, because we have that system of justice. And I think that it's important for the courts to be the leaders in showing, demonstrating, and teaching how to deal with dispute and conflict in a civil manner. We have, as a rule of conduct, every lawyer who is admitted to practice in the Bar of Montana has to take an oath to uphold the rules of professional conduct. And those rules emphasize a lawyer's obligations to deal honestly with others. They emphasize the duty of candor to the court and to fairness to other parties and counsel. And the rules also speak to the lawyer as a public citizen. And I'm just going to quote, because it's what I love about being part of this profession is the goals and aspirations that we are held to when we take that oath. It says a lawyer should further the public's understanding of and confidence in the rule of law and the justice system, because legal institutions in a constitutional democracy depend on popular participation and support to maintain their authority. So it's our obligation to make sure that the public has trust in our democratic institutions, and I think that those of us who have the privilege of holding public office have to be held to a much higher standard in order to do that, because we have to show that our institutions are worthy of the public's trust. Our Supreme Court recently adopted an amendment to the oath of admission that when just last month we got to have a little ceremony where we swear in all the new members of the State Bar of Montana, most of whom are recent law graduates. And we have a ceremony in the Capitol that's quite lovely and exciting for all the families. And all the lawyers have to take an oath, and part of their new written oath is the part we added, not only the part about being candid, fair, and courteous before the court and with other attorneys, but it specifically uses the word civility. I will maintain civility toward opposing parties and their counsel, not only in court, but also in all written and oral communications, and advance no fact prejudicial to the honor or reputation of the party or witness. So I think the legal profession is taking a keen interest in trying to promote civility in the discourse in the court system. The organization that Judge Best was one of the few honored members of in Montana, the American Board of Trial Attorneys, has a new program nationwide called Civility Matters. And it's designed to go out and educate. They do educational programs in law schools and in the schools to elevate the standards of integrity, honor, ethics, civility, and courtesy in the legal profession, and promote professional and civil behavior in the practice of law. And we actually have, I think in our court we have seen improvement. I'll just say from my own standpoint, I think the court has seen improvement in our own discourse, in our written opinions, and that's where it shows up for judges. We have to show respect for the parties and respect for the courts whose decisions are appealed to us, and respect for each other. And we actually have, in just a couple of opinions issued this summer, we have pointed out in written opinions instances during a court proceeding where lawyers or professional witnesses were not acting civilly toward each other, and we've called them out on that in opinions, hoping to encourage the trial judges to do the same thing, and to make sure that people's feet are held to the fire on this. There's no place in a courtroom for sarcasm or belittling a person who's in court, and I think it does set a model. It's not the only place where we have to work on civility, but we all work in our own spheres, and I think if each of us in the professions or the occupations or activities we engage in daily life start to have these conversations and set the tone ourselves and show that we can do it, then it will spread to others. In the court system, what civility does for our system of justice, I already mentioned building confidence in the justice system. But it also, when you have civil discourse between lawyers, their clients get better results, they get faster results, and the disputes are resolved more quickly with more ownership from the clients. If they are able to sit down in a mediation or a negotiation and resolve their own case, they have more confidence in the decision than if it just gets handed to them by a judge because they weren't able to talk civilly about working it out. And of course, more confidence in the justice system and respect for the rule of law leads to more trust that our process and our system is working the way it should to protect people's rights and to administer the law in an impartial and timely manner. On the Montana Supreme Court, there are just 7 members, and we sit across the table from each other every single week and talk about dozens of cases, 50 or more weeks a year. And so when you're sitting in a room with those people and deciding hundreds of cases, you learn to, you do some of the rules that are up here. You learn to listen, you learn to respect, you learn that you can change your mind when you hear a reasonable position that you didn't think of before. And someone who is writing a dissent to an opinion I'm working on is going to be the person I work in partnership with on the next case, and that goes on week after week after week. So I think that kind of personal communication and having to sit down face to face and having the best outcome for all in mind makes our process work quite effectively, and I think it can be a model for other interactions in society. So I hope to continue to find ways to do that, and I think our court system in Montana is a very good one. I think our judges at the district court level work hard to try to promote these values and this respect as well. So that's kind of my summary, and I don't want to take up too much time, but we'll hopefully have a little more discussion on this as we have time.
Thank you, Justice Baker. Mitch, I think you're next on the list.
Well, again, thank you for Big Sky Rising for the invitation, and for Great Falls Rising, sorry, for the invitation, and I appreciate being in front of this, on this esteemed panel. It's definitely an honor, and thank you all for coming out tonight. It's events like these that don't get too far if we don't have public participation, so thank you very much. And after listening to Mr. Waterman and Ms. Baker giving a bit of a more macro discussion on civil discourse, is it politics? My focus tonight, and the way I will answer any questions that are posed, is more on a micro level. And that micro level stems from being in the Montana legislature from 2007 to 2016. I'll never forget when I first ran in 2006, I really, even though I'd helped out on campaigns, I really didn't have much of an idea of how to really run a grassroots campaign. And a friend of mine found a book, who knows where, on the internet, and it was called Win the Right Way. And I remember it was out of California, Berkeley Press, and I bought that book, and I've lent that book around to some of you. But as I was thinking about that book today and getting ready for the talk tonight, Win the Right Way was all about civil discourse and going door to door and knocking. And I'll never forget, one of the nicest points it had in there was it said, if you're knocking or you're talking to somebody and you don't know the answer, just say, I don't know, and I'll get back to you. But my political career, as far as starting off representing the north side of Great Falls and Black Eagle, definitely started many years before at the kitchen table. But when I first ran, I do remember that book, Win the Right Way. My time in the Senate and the Montana House of Representatives was very civil. One of the first people I glommed onto was the great Senator John Cobb, Republican out of Augusta. I think when the session ended in 2007, he probably felt like a 150-pound weight had been lifted off his back, because I wasn't there to ask him a question day after day after day when he went back to his ranch. But Senator Cobb said early on, I don't know if he said it or if I read it, but he said, Mitch, don't be mad. Number one, don't get married to any piece of legislation. Don't get your heart set on a certain vote. And he said, never ever get mad at somebody in the Senate or the House for voting against you on a particular day. And then Senator Cobb looked at me and he said, because you're going to need them tomorrow. And he was so right. And that was my introduction to civil discourse in the Montana Senate. And I did. I needed those 49 other senators many a time, because only in 2007 were the Democrats, I was a Democrat, I am a Democrat, were the Democrats in the majority. So the other years, the other sessions, I needed to be civil, I needed to get along, I needed senators day in and day out, because I didn't have enough votes to carry a bill in my party. So I needed the other people. I also never forget to make the bookend on the civil discourse. Not only was it Senator Cobb, when I started my Senate time, I remember Senator Gent from Bozeman. We were out to dinner one time in Helena, and he was visiting with the table, and I wrote the comment down. He said, you've got to be able to move and live and operate in the sensible middle. And I thought that was a great comment because, as Senator Gent said, if you're not operating in the sensible middle, you're not going to get anything done. You can get up in the Montana Senate or the Montana House of Representatives, and you can throw Molotov cocktails, but nothing's going to get passed and nothing's going to get signed. So if you don't work in the sensible middle, you're not going to get anything done for the people that you represent back home or in the state of Montana in general. So those were two of the bookends for me with Senator Cobb and Senator Gent. And finally, I'll just wrap up my first talk just on how civil discourse ultimately paid off for people that I represented and the McLaughlin Research Center here, and former Senator Schmidt is in the back, and she was involved in this story as well. But in the 2009 session, I moved an amendment to get $2 million for McLaughlin Research here in Great Falls. And at that time, I was on Senate Finance and Claims. There were 11 Republicans and 9 Democrats. So to get an amendment into a bill, I had to have a majority vote. I was hoping I could carry 9 votes because 9 Democrats I was hoping would vote for my amendment for McLaughlin Research. But I still needed to flip or talk to or convince 2 Republicans at least to go along with my amendment. And $2 million is a big amendment. And I was able to get that amendment into House Bill 2, and the McLaughlin Research Center did receive nearly $2 million of funding that year. It was my amendment, but it was people like Senator Schmidt and people at McLaughlin Research and a whole lot of other people that made that come to fruition. But when the session was over, I was approached by a fellow senator, a fellow Democrat, and they said to me, gosh, Mitch, how in the world did you get that amendment into the bill? He was just befuddled that I could actually get an amendment into a bill on Senate Finance and Claims when I only had, relatively speaking, 9 people in my same party, and I still had to convince them. And I looked at the senator and I said, you know what I did? And I think he thought I was going to say, I did some quid pro quos, I traded my votes, I bought a bunch of dinners. And I said, you know what I did, Senator? I said, there's 20 people on Senate Finance and Claims. I didn't walk into my own office, obviously. I said I walked into 19 offices. I told each senator on Finance and Claims what I was going to do, how I was going to move my amendment, what it was for, and how important I thought McLaughlin Research Center was. And in the end, the vote was 11-9, and we got that amendment on. So I carried 2 Republicans that day, and so did Senator Schmidt. My point being is that the senator was just, his jaw dropped, thinking that I didn't make any deals or do anything. I just asked people to vote for me. And I'll end by quoting just the one and only Senator Mansfield, and I think civil discourse also comes with one of the things that Senator Mansfield believed in. And Senator Mansfield once said, I don't like surprises. Just don't surprise me. Come over and talk to me. If you're going to do something, whatever you're going to do, just come and talk to me because I don't like surprises. So again, it's wonderful to be here. I just feel honored, and I just look forward to your questions and your comments either during or after our talk tonight. So thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you, Mitch. Mike Dennison, you're next.
Good evening, everyone. I always love coming to Great Falls because this is where I got my start in journalism many, many years ago. And I worked many years for the Great Falls Tribune, which was a great place to work, by the way. I'm going to talk tonight about the media landscape and its role in public discourse. And there's a lot of reasons for the way things are. I'll just talk about a few. 40 years ago, our news sources were fairly limited. We had a local newspaper, we had a local TV station, 3 big networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, the general interest news magazines, Time, Newsweek, and that was pretty much it. And those were pretty trusted sources, and because they were so few, I think, those organizations said, okay, we've got to present the news straight and factual and really toe the line on being fair and balanced. You also had opinion news magazines as well, National Review, the New Republic, the Progressive, the Atlantic, the Nation, many of which are still around. And they provided kind of an analytical, a slanted look at the news, but an analytical, thoughtful look at the news. And then, since then, a couple things have happened that have kind of changed that landscape. One was back in the late 80s, the abolishment of the Fairness Doctrine. And this was a doctrine adopted by the Federal Communications Commission back in the late 1940s that required holders of broadcast licenses to present controversial issues of public interest in a balanced way. And it didn't say you had to give both sides exactly, it just said you had to present contrasting views. And it was enforced by the FCC. It wasn't real draconian enforcement, I think it was just kind of self-enforced among people who held those licenses. But then in 1987, it was abolished by the FCC, and the person behind this was an appointee of President Reagan, and they voted to abolish it. And Congress tried to reinstate it, and President Reagan vetoed it. And I think this was kind of gave rise partially to conservative talk radio and more sources on the airwaves that were one-sided and presented one point of view. And then other things followed, like Fox News and MSNBC. That was later on. I think that was somewhat related, not that much, but I think that was kind of the birth of the more one-sided presentation on the broadcast airwaves. And the next thing that happened, of course, is the internet in the 1990s. And the internet, which was first touted as opening the window to all forms of and sources of communication, you can see anything, which is true, you can. But it also means that you get to choose whatever you want to see. And it's not like back in what I mentioned 40 years ago, where you had a limited source and you could choose among those limited sources, and you got kind of a not the same thing, but a similar thing. Now you get to choose whatever you want, and I think what has happened that more and more you're choosing what aligns with your preconceived view of the world. Facebook, Twitter, huge sources of news for people now, and as you know, on Facebook and on Twitter, you choose who you want to follow. If you see something you don't like, then you can stop following it. And so I think there are a lot of people out there choosing only to hear and read something that reflects their preconceived notion of the world. And so you're kind of stuck in an echo chamber as a news consumer. And also the internet makes it very easy. When you see something you don't like, you can reply directly to that person. If they make you mad, you can reply right away. And you can be as snotty as you want, often without consequence. And unless, well, really without consequence. That brings me to the modern political campaign. And I don't think that probably things haven't changed all that much in terms of demonizing your opponent as a strategy. Define them before they can define themselves as someone who's not one of us. I mean, this has been a strategy that's been around for quite a while. And it's an appeal to emotion and tribalism, and it's always been a staple of politics. But now we have these tools of instant communication at our disposal. And we also have Citizens United, which wiped out any limits on campaign spending, or led to more decisions that really wiped it out. And it's ironic, you think back about the Fairness Doctrine. When they abolished the Fairness Doctrine, one of the things they said was, oh, this is because it violates free speech rights. And that's the same argument that was used to get rid of Citizens United. And so now there's, in addition to all this instant communication, the power of the internet, there's so much money in campaigns that as a reporter, you can hardly keep up, let alone a viewer or an average consumer in terms of checking something out. If I see something that I say, oh, this is, I'd like to check this ad out and do a story on fact check this. By the time I get done doing that, there's 10 more things that have already been shown in the ensuing days. And also with all this money, I think it gravitates toward the big races, US Senate primarily, and US House too, and some other things. It drowns out all other campaigns, all coverage of other campaigns, very much things that really matter, like the legislature. I mean, how often have you seen a story on a legislative race on TV? Almost never. And in the newspaper, very few. You know, and I think these are the races that really matter. And they're just lost in the sea. And then, of course, we also, with the internet, we also have the wiping out of the revenue model for newspapers. And so newspapers have smaller staffs and can cover these things less. So the next question is, what do we do? What does the media do in response to this landscape that's being created? And that's a tough question to answer. I think that one thing reporters and the media in general have to do, you have to kind of resist the temptation to run with the latest hand grenade and focus on issues and things that are important. I think that also tones down kind of the personalization of political news. You know, what are politicians actually doing in Congress, in the governor's office, the president? Not what they're tweeting, what are they doing on policy? What are they passing? What's being put into law? But I can tell you that's not what most people want to read. They enjoy being thrilled by the latest bombast. As an example, when I covered President Trump in Missoula a couple weeks ago, here's the president praising Greg Gianforte for punching out a reporter. I mean, that's the lead of that speech, no doubt about it. And I wrote a story about that, as did almost every other reporter there. But I couldn't help but notice on my Facebook page, the next day and the ensuing days, just scores of comments. This is what everyone's reading and commenting in a pretty nasty way. And when I read a lengthy story about policy and about how an issue's affected people, maybe one comment, maybe two comments. That's just the way it is. And the president has shown us, how the power of personality, of outrageous personality, no matter what the content, can just dominate a news cycle. And as reporters, we really have to learn to resist that. But it's so difficult because there are so many organizations out there. The media is not a united front. If you have 10 people who say, we're not going to report this, this is BS, this is not worth reporting, it just takes one person to say, oh, I'm going to report it, and there you go. Now, in order for this to work better, to have us resist these temptations, people have to have some trust in the media. But we have a president denigrating the media every day. And that's always been part of the political playbook of some people. But now it's been taken to an extreme, barely imaginable a few years ago. Myself and my colleagues are being called dishonest, fake news, the enemy of the American people. And as you know, nothing could be further from the truth. The free press in America, the First Amendment, is, I think, it's like no other place in the world, really. It's what makes this country great. But the president is tearing that down every day. I get calls and messages from viewers on a regular basis accusing me of bias and saying, you wrote this because you're biased, you did this because you're biased. And sometimes I'm able to talk to those people. They'll call me or I'll call, return their message. I'll say, I didn't really write that because I'm biased. I wrote this because of this. Here's why I chose what to do. And after those conversations, people are usually I wouldn't say placated, but at least they understand what you're doing. And I think that's, and I can't talk to every single person. So it's a long road down that path. But I think it's a path that we have to try to take. And one thing that Mitch said at the end about Senator Mansfield, not surprising people, to me that's just been one of the hallmarks of what I've done during my career when I talk to people, sources, readers, whoever, they say, what are you doing? What's the story? Where are you going with that? And I can tell them everything. I say, here's what I'm going to write. Here's who I'm going to talk to. Here's how I'm going to approach this. And when I'm done, if it's something controversial, I'll call them back and say, here's what the story's going to say. Essentially, I'm not going to read them the story, but I'll tell them what's in it. And then when they pick up the paper or they watch TV, they're not surprised and angry. So that's something we can do too. But like I said, at this point, I'm not very optimistic, but I really think that there is a way for the press and the media to regain the trust of people, but it's going to take everyone to work on it, including politicians. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and now the best for last. Judge Best.
Thank you. I am in an auspicious position of being the cleanup hitter, and I think all of the best batters have already gone. Commissioner Moe is telling me to get this mic closer to me. I don't think that I can add a lot to what everyone else has said much more expertly than I can. I think we all recognize that we have a polarization problem in our community and in our society. The question is, we're all here, we're all having a conversation. How is it that we aren't able to have a conversation on a macro level? And I don't have an answer to that. I will talk to you a little bit about what I see on a daily basis in the courtroom. Some of what Mr. Dennison was just talking about is interesting to me because I think a couple of 100 years ago when we started with our grand experiment of having jurors who come into our courtrooms and make a decision in terms of a community standard and come in and look at the facts and decide what happened in this particular case. The jurors actually came into the courtroom and the community actually came into the courtroom to watch the proceedings to see what happened. Now what happens is we don't take the time to read Mr. Dennison's articles because they're too long. What we do is we read the line or two on Facebook saying that some 18-year-old kid was not convicted of raping another 16-year-old kid, and decide that someone in the courtroom, even though we weren't there and we didn't hear the facts, must have gone light on that kid because he didn't get convicted. I know we may have a few public defenders here as well. Mr. Racky, who is our county attorney, is here. Detective Slaughter is here, who's one of our police officers. Everyone who's in the system understands that this process is very, very difficult. A friend of mine once said that every single person in the courtroom is in crisis. And that's the truth. Every single person, including jurors, they're there for the very first time, hoping that they're not going to get called on and have to back clean up and have to tell some lawyer what reasonable doubt means. So everyone is feeling a level of stress. Everyone is listening to the actual facts, and then someone puts out on Twitter or Facebook or wherever, but certainly not Mr. Dennison's article, something that's very far from what the truth is. And pretty soon we have a group of people who are up in arms wanting to pillory the person that they felt should have been convicted on facts that they don't know and that probably don't exist. So I think one solution, I don't think it's the solution, is to get more people in to see what's going on in our real courtrooms and see what the real truth is. It's very difficult to prove a lot of things in the criminal setting, for example. We have an extraordinary group of lawyers, many of them young lawyers, who are handling the criminal cases in our district, and I can speak mostly about this district, who treat each other civilly. They're vigorous advocates. Every once in a while, people get a little hot under the collar, as they have a right to do. I think it's not hard to tamp that down if necessary, but frankly, I haven't had that need in my courtroom to do that. People are professional and are able to have conversations about very, very difficult subjects respectfully with each other and either reach agreements or not and go to trial or not. We have other settings though where it's equally difficult for people, and it's often where we have people who aren't represented by lawyers. We have many pro se self-represented people who are in family law conflicts, and they are much further down the continuum than hot under the collar. They're ready to strangle someone, and they'd like me to do it for them. So what I start out usually doing is first of all, trying to figure out what the actual problem is, because it's usually not what they think it is. But I start out by telling them, I don't have any sticks up here, and I don't have a belt that I'm keeping notches in, because it's not about either one of you. Usually it's about the kids, and they want to take shots at each other about, well, you didn't have, lettuce on the plate at 7 o'clock, and I would have had it on the plate at 7 o'clock, and you put it on the plate at 6:45, and so see what my problem is. And so we start talking about being adults and talking about reminding them that this is about kids, and we need to talk about the kids. And once we get reoriented, we can start having a conversation about what the problem is. And I think that's one way. I don't think it's the only way, but I think that's one way to try to solve some of these problems. Others are much more gnarly. The felony cases are much more difficult to resolve in that way. We also have a tremendous youth in need of care problem in this community. I know you all know about it, but every year we get to August and we have as many kids in the system as we had the previous end of December. And we're still there, and it's mostly meth. But these people have preconceived notions about what's going on in the courtroom. And of course, you're not invited to those. These are private because they involve children. But it's important to understand that most of these parents, there's a few abusers out there that should not have kids and probably should be in a prison somewhere, but most of them are hooked on a drug. They're usually, in our county, hooked on meth, but they can be hooked on opioids, and they love their children. So the challenge then is to not polarize, and the lawyers, again, that do these cases are excellent, and they do a good job of trying to identify the problem without polarizing and without attacking and without raising the level of tension and stress and anxiety for people who are already at the peak of anxiety. And so we work on the problem, and the problem can be worked on because we now have a way to provide options for treatment, which people weren't able to get before. We're able to get them to a place where they can get treated and they can start fixing the problems and they can put their family back together. Doesn't always work, but it works a lot. So on a micro scale, that's the kind of thing that we see. And I'll just end by saying, I tell juries when they come in, words to the effect of, this is the people's courtroom. You are here doing the most important work that you could be doing in our democracy, because this is the only place that our citizens get to be the government. You get to decide as a community what our standards are and what we're going to do about it. So when we're reading things on Facebook and we're criticizing what happens in a courtroom, we're really saying our friends and our neighbors and our husbands and our brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers just couldn't figure it out. And I have a lot more faith in our community than that. And I think it's a great system. It doesn't always get it right, but I think it's also a way of solving problems in a civilized way, and having a civil discourse where we can lay it all out on the table, the community kitchen table, and solve it. Thank you.
Thank you again to all our panelists. Every one of them was different and every one of them was informative, and I hope that you all enjoyed it. Now we have a brief time for a few questions, so If you ask a question, please raise your hand so that I can come with the mic, because otherwise everybody in the room won't be able to hear your question. And it's
Or
very
ideas.
frustrating.
We'll hear ideas too, not just questions.
What did somebody say? I didn't hear that.
Oh, Barbara, it was me, sorry. I said anyone with ideas can speak up too, not just questions.
That's true, yes, of course.
Does anyone have anything?
Thank you. My name is David. I just moved to Great Falls a few months ago from San Francisco Bay Area. I work in high tech. And I guess my question has to do with education and the importance, or perhaps lack of importance, of funding for civics education in the schools and teaching kids about parliamentary and argumentation and debate, and how we expect anyone to enter the society as adults if we haven't taught them